Okay? Well, let's open in a word of prayer. Lord, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to these people today. We pray that you will bless our time together as we look at some of the craziness going on in a world that has been given over to a reprobate mind. Bless us today in Jesus' name, amen. So that's why I titled this. I was talking to a friend the other day and said maybe I should just say the world is Meshugge. That's a Yiddish term which means crazy. So I don't know if it's Meshugge-ness or just Meshugge-na, but it's crazy what we see going on. So here's some of the platforms that we're on. I'm going to look at a couple things in a little more in depth today than usual, just because I think it's important. And yes, I have some clips of people that you don't like, but I think it's important because I think one of them will really sort of tie a lot of threads together as to what's been going on, particularly here in the United States culturally, but this is happening all over the world. We talk the convergence of events, how things are happening quickly. And here's a slide that I use for the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, first, second, third, and fourth seals. And we know that these seals, now my view of the seals is the seals open, and then like the first seal opens, and that process takes a while. And while that's going on, the second seal will open, and then that will go on in the third and fourth. But I was trying to figure out sort of how to depict it graphically as to the fact that, and there's a controversy if the seals opened or not. I don't think they have, but I think at some point we're going to have to sit down and have some serious conversations in the eschatology community and say, are we seeing actual things being fulfilled? Not just foreshadows. So there's foreshadows. So I try to depict this graphically. So you see the shadows kind of going back towards the beginning of the scroll here. That's an indication to you that this is these seals and these other things that are going to be happening in this last period of human history are going to be casting a shadow before them. And I talk about it in the different, and so for example, let's look at that'd be the 4th horseman. And there you see how I try to show you that his shadow is before he actually comes on the scene. And then as we get closer, the shadow will sharpen up, and then you'll be able to see that. So I hope that depicts it graphically. And so at the same time, this other horsemen, they're all going to be overlapping. I guess that's the way I'm trying to say this. And then part of this relates to this little grid that I have: acceleration, convergence, logistics, and understanding. Part of the things that are going to happen with regard to the 3rd or 4th horseman, there's logistics. There have to be things in place for that to happen. So 3rd seal, great famine, economic distress. You can sort of see the beginnings of that right now, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. And eventually, things will become clearer, and the wise will be able to understand. The other thing that we know that there's an acceleration that occurs. It's a graphic I used a number of years ago. This is Yankee Stadium, and growing up around in Cleveland and Pittsburgh, we don't like Yankee Stadium. I've been there, and so the graphic I'm going to use is, how does this, to give you an idea of exponential acceleration, which I think is going to happen with regard to Bible prophecy. It's going to get really, really crazy. It's going to get really Meshugge. So take an eyedropper and go out to second base and drop a drop of water. And then a minute later, drop 2 drops of water. Then, keep doing that, drop 4 drops, then 8, then 16. And the question then is, how long does it take? And this is a great thing for it, because we want to fill up Yankee Stadium with water, right? That would be a great thing. But how long does it take, using that eyedropper and doubling it every minute, how long does it take to fill up Yankee Stadium with water? It takes less than 50 minutes. And remember, though, 2 minutes before that, it's only a quarter full. So that gives you an idea of acceleration and exponential in kind of a good illustration. This is the world that we're going to live in, I believe. So here, one of the things that we talked about is supply chains. Here's a graphic from marinetraffic.com, and I filtered it out so it only shows container ships and oil tankers and tanker ships that are on the oceans of the world. This was done last evening. And it shows you their position. It's a pretty phenomenal thing. Here's a satellite image of that. And this is what's going on right now. This is the way the world operates. Now, we could do this with rail traffic and air traffic, because we do live in a global world, whether we like it or not. Ships and goods are transferred internationally. I remember a few years ago, I ordered a MacBook, and I clicked on pay, and I got a notice that it was at a plant in Shanghai. It was at my house less than 36 hours later from Shanghai. Exactly what I ordered. And so I've kind of viewed the modern supply chain as a bit of a miracle. It's amazing that it works. You add into that rail cars and trucks, vans, delivery vans, and it's amazing. It is a modern miracle. But what's happening now is all of these supply chains are being disrupted. Shanghai's been on lockdown. Here's a picture of Shanghai. And the circular, if you look more closely, I think I have a little bit zoomed in one here. If you look a little bit more closely, you'll see circles and then ones that kind of look like a little ship. The ones that look like a ship shape are in transit. They're moving. The circular ones are just sitting there, anchored. So, look at this, and so that's Shanghai, and then the river and port up through Shanghai, and you can see there's a lot of ships just sitting there, not doing anything. And this has been going on now. They've had major lockdowns. There are probably 240 million people under complete total lockdown in China right now, including the entire city of Shanghai has been. People screaming in their apartment buildings. They can't leave. They're starving. Some have jumped out of windows to commit suicide. And Shanghai is the third largest city on planet Earth by most estimates. It's one of the most important ports in the world, if not the most important in terms of transferring goods. And this marinetraffic.com, if you click on one of those little circles, and if it's within a certain distance of the port or land, it'll tell you what the name of the ship is, where it's going, when it'll arrive, and who it's flagged under, what country it's flagged under. Libya, Greece have flagged it. And remember last year we had the logistics problem in the ports of Los Angeles, Long Beach. And if you've ever been out there, there's just tens of thousands of these containers around. And it's like, how do you get all of this stuff from there to here? And how do you know what in that container has to get over to this container to get on this truck or this rail car or what? It's amazing that it works. And now it's disrupted. But there were hundreds of ships. They didn't even have room to anchor off the port of Los Angeles. But now if you look at the port of Los Angeles there's not that many ships. Why? See prior slide. They're over there in Shanghai. So this is going to cause problems. This is an article from Al Ghad. This is the Jordanian newspaper published by the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan and Amman. And they're talking about the fact that they had ordered 120,000 tons of wheat, but they canceled the order. Now, Jordan's not a rich country. Its ruler is very rich. I think I've seen estimates that he will make somewhere between $1 and $2 billion a year off of his investments, which means he's got more than $1 or $2 billion. But the country, it's poor. It's probably the driest country on the planet. They have a couple million, 2 to 3 million refugees from Syria that are still living in 10 cities in Jordan. They have very few water resources. They have to have agreements with Israel to buy water. And that's another thing that's coming is their water wars are coming. There are water conflicts all over the place right now. We know down in Ethiopia, as Ethiopia is filling the dam, there are rumors of a war coming between Ethiopia and Egypt, because Egypt relies solely on the water of the Nile. 96% of the country lives within a couple miles of the Nile River. And they think that, well, you're going to fill up that dam and we're not going to get the water flow that we need, and that's where we get our agriculture, life, everything. We grow cotton up in the Nile Delta. But here's Jordan. They're saying, look, we had an order for 120,000 tons of wheat. We've canceled it. Why? Because the price had risen to $450 to $500 per ton. That's unusually high. You have the war going on in Ukraine and Russia. Russia has, very fertile land. Ukraine has some of the most fertile land on the planet. Doesn't look like Ukraine's going to get planted this year. Maybe Russia will allow it to happen. They're pretty much in control of everything. But Russia and Ukraine, 30 to 40% of the wheat in the world, and way above 50% of the wheat used by all of the Middle Eastern countries. Back in 2011, there was a civil war that started in Syria, mainly started over rising food prices following a 3-year drought that affected its bread basket up around Dar el-Zor off the Euphrates River. Turkey has giant dams that they've built on the rivers that flow down into Syria, Iraq, and they can shut off the water. Now, that has some prophetic significance to it, I think, because it does talk about the river Euphrates being dried up, and Turkey could do that today. And because Turkey's been keeping a lot of the water, there used to be a pretty large farming community in the Euphrates and Tigris River Delta as it approached the Persian Gulf, and those people are starving. They have nothing to do because the water is not there, and they can't farm like they used to. So water wars, like we needed something else, right? So now here come water wars. And they get a lot of, and so what happened in Syria 10 years ago, starting in 2011, March of 2011, the Syrian civil war, following a 3 to 5 year drought up in the northeast part of Syria. Imagine that, and they're thinking that this could happen to all of the countries in the Middle East. Especially when they can't grow their own, they don't have water, they have to import it, and now their supply for about 50% of their wheat, let alone some other things, comes from Russia and Ukraine, and nothing's coming out of there right now. That impacts us. People will want the wheat that we grow in the United States, and our winter wheat crop was pathetic this year. Texas is a big winter wheat producer. And I believe I saw a statistic that it was somewhere around 7, 8, 9% of normal. So it truly is this convergence of all of this bad news at the same time. The Center for Strategic and International Studies has a paper out, the Russia-Ukraine War and Global Food Security, a 7-week assessment. and the way forward. It says it presents never before seen consequences for global agriculture, food security. In addition to that, this is in the Epoch Times yesterday or Friday, World Bank chief warns that Russia-Ukraine conflict could trigger a food crisis, a world food crisis. And this comes a lot, as I mentioned earlier, from the Shanghai lockdowns that, and it's putting brakes on China's growth. China's economy is in bad shape. They've always kind of hid their national debt. It's probably a higher percentage than, it probably approaches or exceeds what Japan has. Their major real estate company, Evergrande, has had major problems. They've kind of papered that over. And some people think that these lockdowns are not just for the Charlie Vector situation, but they are also because Xi is trying to be appointed president for life, and there's some opposition, so he's tamping down that opposition in major population centers in China. And again, it's like everything else in the world today. Sometimes there's plenty of information out there, but sometimes it's hard to get accurate information from these countries that are closed. And sometimes what you're getting is pure propaganda. And we know that's going on both sides of this thing in Russia and Ukraine. And then here's a article that says tech firms are ripping apart new washing machines for their computer chips. We had an appliance go out at our house. It probably could have been repaired. It needed a motherboard. It was a refrigerator a few months ago. And so we called the repair guy, and he says, yeah, it's probably a motherboard. If it was he said, if you want a refrigerator anytime soon, go buy one if you can find it. And we were able to find one and buy it, thank heaven. But he said that there were 2,000? I think it was 2,000 people ahead of us in line waiting for that motherboard. And that particular brand that's just one brand of one refrigerator for one company, let alone all these other things. And everything runs on a chip now. We have a washing machine with a chip in it. And it seems like I just walk by it and it lights up and starts beeping at me, torturing me. And as this article says, global shortages are turning the economy upside down. But everything's going great here in the United States. Well, not quite. There have been about 16 in the last month, 16 major food or distribution facilities have had fires. Have you been hearing about this? Tucker Carlson talked about it last night. And what's the old saying? There are no conspiracies, but there are no coincidences. This is a Walmart distribution facility that employed several thousand people in Plainfield, Indiana, on the west suburbs of Indianapolis. It caught fire about a month ago. It burned, and I know this, my brother-in-law who passed away earlier this year was a commander in the Indianapolis Fire Department, so he would talk about fires, and he would have loved this one because it was a biggie. It took 76 hours to put the fire out. I don't know if they know the cause yet, but they're having job fairs for all the warehouse employees. Why? Because they're not building this thing overnight. You know, it takes time to build a warehouse. It's going to take at least a year. I mean, that Amazon thing they built out there in New Albany, it took at least, I think I was out there a year ago and there was nothing. Now it's like the biggest warehouse it was. To give you some idea of this size, this is 1.2 million square feet, this warehouse that was destroyed. That's the size of Polaris Mall. Pretty big. Here's another picture of the fire. Here's another one. Like I said, it burned for 76 hours. Now that's one of 16. Here's another one. This is Salinas, California food plant. This happened about 10 days ago. Firefighters, the article, the news said, firefighters contained a massive blaze at a Central California food processing plant that prompted authorities to tell thousands of nearby residents to evacuate Thursday, and to order tens of thousands more to stay inside their homes. To start a fire Wednesday night at Taylor Farms packaged salad plant. Thank goodness it wasn't cookies, right, or something. Got to look for the silver lining, right? The flames were put under control by late Thursday morning, but the shelter-in-place and evacuation orders remained while the hazardous materials crew worked the scene. And then here's a picture of what's left. And Salinas is a big food processing plant. It's along near the Central Valley. There's a valley there for Salinas, and Central Valley is over the mountain, but it's a big deal. And then if that wasn't enough, what are the odds of this? This is a General Mills food processing plant down around Atlanta, and a plane crashed into it Friday. Like, we needed that, right? I think the pilot and passenger died. And everybody says, well, it's just a coincidence. But on April 20th, the FBI had released this private industry notification about cyber attacks on agricultural cooperatives, potentially timed to critical seasons. Now, does this have anything to do with the fires they've seen in these facilities? I don't know. There's a number of potatoes. A potato chip place got hit by someplace, and it's changing. Here's some picture. This is out of Peru from the Financial Times. They're having protests, protests down there, and Peru is a place where we get a lot of fruits and vegetables in America from. Now, there was a decision earlier this week that struck down, thank heaven, a mask mandate for travelers. And I'm sure you saw all the videos of people cheering on planes. But immediately, Philadelphia came out and said, well, we're keeping it in place on public transit. And yeah, New York, they were going to do it too. And now there's a big fight. People are like, well, I can't believe you would be so, I don't care what the judge said. And the judge, she went to a Christian college. Did you see this on MSNBC? She went to a Christian college. She was appointed by Trump. She's only 33. The American Bar Association designated her as not qualified. Well, what I know about, I dropped my membership in the American Bar Association over a quarter of a century ago because of the insanity that was coming out of them. I went to the ABA convention once in San Francisco in 1992. It was during the presidential campaign that year. And they had a big award ceremony for Anita Hill, who testified the year before at the Clarence Thomas. She got an award from the ABA. And then, of course, everybody was all Twitter. That was before Twitter existed, but they were all aflutter because Hillary Clinton was coming to the American Bar Association convention. So I did the appropriate thing. I went and played golf. And I enjoyed myself. But you'll see that this mask mandate has really caused a lot of division. In Rhode Island, where my grandparents, great-grandparents one of my grandparents was from Rhode Island, introduced a bill to require people to get the state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er. And here's what the provision in the bill says. Every person of at least 16 years of age who is eligible for the state-approved treatment for Charlie Vector 019er and who resides in the state of Rhode Island, works in the state of Rhode Island, or pays personal income taxes to the state of Rhode Island pursuant to Chapter 30 shall be required to get the state-approved treatment. And if you don't, there's a penalty. Look at what the penalty is. Shall be required to pay a monthly civil penalty of $50 and shall owe twice the amount of personal income taxes as would otherwise be assessed pursuant to our revenue code. So this thing is not going away. Now, I've been in contact with people. I don't know if I should identify the jurisdiction, people who have submitted religious exemptions for police department. The city involved, I put a picture up of a state out west, and I put Moloch where the state name would be, because I think given some of the bills that they're trying to pass about abortion and that type of thing, the state is gone. Meshugge. It's crazy. It's just insane. It's Romans chapter 1. So here's the word that I got from somebody who's involved in the situation there where they're being mandated to get this state-approved treatment. I wanted to reach out to you on behalf of the thousands of city workers that are standing up for their religious rights. I know that you're a friend to those that are true believers and a proponent of law enforcement. It recently came to my attention that the city council is sitting on a motion that would end the mandate for its employees, 2,200 of which are officers who have submitted religious exemptions. While it would be reasonable if the city respected the beliefs of others, they have been denying most of those requests that they have reviewed, vowing to remove them as unfit or not suitably religious. So they're being passed over for promotions and that sort of thing. I believe this person who wrote to me, I believe this has more to do with the purging of the faithful from public service at the cost of public safety than public safety itself. And they're doing this at airlines. And then I read an article this morning that airlines need to hire in the United States 14,500 pilots per year, starting now. So what are we going to do? We're going to make it even more difficult for somebody to become a pilot. And who cares what happens to the economy? I mean, you would have to think after a while that they're intentionally tearing the whole thing down. You know, the kindest thing you can say is they're Meshugge. They're crazy. And they are. Here's from Sweden. This now up to about 6,000 people have received this chip. This is from Newsweek. You can now get a payment chip implanted in your hand for $200. Go for it. And the guy who wrote for the Sweden blog said, remember when this was called a crazy conspiracy theory? Let's take a look at the new cashless society. And I don't know this guy's eschatology or anything, but he's saying, something's going on. And I played you clip after clip of people from the World Government Summit and that type of thing who talk about cashless society, central bank digital currencies will be issued by countries. It's not going to be private. It's going to be sovereign. It's going to be programmable. Oh, yeah, we need to have a digital bill of rights for people that are going to get caught up in this. And of course, have you seen one of those proposed yet by anyone? I have not seen it. This is a blog out of the Privacy Network out of Italy in the city of Bologna. I don't know if that's how you say Bologna. This is no baloney, folks. This is real. Smart Citizen Wallet from the city of Bologna. This is reported in their, here's another blog. Italy could be the first EU nation with a social credit score. The municipality of Bologna, Italy, is rolling out a social credit score in the fall, the first of its kind in Europe. And here is a newspaper that talked about it. And it's for your convenience. It's no problem. You know, just you'll be able to mobile, you'll be able to get it. But look at what the article says is really going on with this. The card with digital points for the virtuous citizen. Among the most innovative interventions is the Smart Citizen Wallet. The wallet of the virtuous citizen, explains Bugani, who had worked on the project with the Draghi administration. The idea is similar to the mechanism of a supermarket points collection. As the counselor himself points out, the citizen will have an acknowledgement if he differentiates the waste, if he uses public transport, if he in other words, you recycle your things, you put the plastics in the plastic bin and not in the other bin. I know my wife's going to sit back and she goes, you're going to get dinged on this. If he uses public transport, if he manages energy well, if he does not take sanctions from the municipal authority, if he is active with the culture card. And everybody's, I did a talk on this in Canada last April. Deplatforming humanity. And the whole thing seems to be a house of cards. And we know it'll all come down, but until then, there'll be some problems. This is, I think I mentioned a little bit about this Sunday, last Sunday, about the decline in population in China. China has a major population decline coming. I mean, we're talking China's going to lose, the Lord tarries, in a generation they'll lose hundreds of millions of people in their population. Iran, as I read you clip right out of the Tehran Times, talking about that in Iran, the collapse in their birth rate is unprecedented in human history. And then we know Persia's involved in this end time thing. So are they going to sit around and wait? Well, I don't think Russia sat around and waited. I think you could make the case, a very good case, that Putin moved now. He had some beefs that he wanted to settle and things he wanted to get in place before he's off the scene, and he wants to protect his legacy. But Russia has a population decline, and they have a Muslim problem, and they're using a Muslim brigade in Ukraine. And then this article in the Financial Times this week, dwindling rates of fertility test child strategies across the globe. And what they're finding is, we're putting incentives in for people to have children and babies, and guess what? They're not working. Now, part of it may be that people are looking around and thinking like, the world's kind of miserable right now. I don't think I want to bring a kid into this world. That would be a rational decision, but it has major economic consequences. And then you layer that on top of all the geopolitical things that are going on, and you have sort of the perfect storm for things that we talk about coming about in the end times to happen. Now, maybe they won't happen for a while. I'm just saying that there's certainly a convergence of all of these things. This is Germany, Financial Times. Germany braces itself for Russian gas ban. Immediate Russian gas ban would cost Germany 165 billion euros immediately. Well, that's troubling. And the people in Germany know this. So Germany's not going along, they're not going along with the EU or NATO on any of this stuff. They're resisting the return to nuclear. They got rid of all their nuclear power plants, and they won't recommission them because, climate change. But I don't think nuclear power plants, they put out steam. I don't think they put out much in the way of carbon dioxide. The whole thing is just insanity. The Fed, the US dollar is kind of bouncing around. Who knows what's going to happen? Fed's hawkish tone feeds market anxiety over runaway inflation. It's not the Fed talking about it. It's people going to the store and seeing how much things are costing. Have you noticed the prices are up? Yeah. Well, just wait. Because I don't know how else to say it. I can't sugarcoat it. U.S. inflation reaches a 40-year high as food, energy, and food prices soar. At the same time, they're putting all this effort into the metaverse. Meta is building an artificial intelligence building out there in New Albany. I think their total investment will be over $1.5 billion. Google over twice that across the road. Amazon server farms all around town. And we're not the only place that these are happening. And this is an article from law.com where lawyers are forming practice groups about selling pieces of the metaverse off. And how do you engage in these transactions to buy a piece of the digital real estate that's going to be involved? Lawyers aren't doing this because they're doing it to make money. So there are metaverse practice groups springing up, just like there are ESG, environment, social, and governance practice groups to advise corporations. There are diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are climate change groups. And people are engaged, a lot of companies are engaged in what's called greenwashing. They take their stuff, they repackage it and say, look how energy efficient and green we are. And it's all a bunch of fluff. a lot of times. And so now there are articles about lawsuits, about corporations, about getting them because they're greenwashing everything. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this. There's a group out there called Libs of TikTok. Libs of TikTok is on Twitter. They've had a bit of an issue with Twitter, but last I saw their account was still up. And what Libs of TikTok has done is they go to TikTok and they say, hey, here's what the liberals are doing. We're taking their videos off of TikTok and we're reposting them here so you can see what they really think. And they'll post a teacher talking about what she talks to her kindergartners about and that type of thing. And it's frightening. And the conclusion that a lot of people have is that these people are Meshugge. But they're involved in teaching kids, running governments, running public policy. So here's one that says, New Jersey kindergarten teacher is excited to diversify our library and read a book about a little kid cross-dressing and becoming trans to her 5-year-old students. And here's the book, My Sister Sam. And you can see the book, it's all, and there's a lot of these books out there. And this is why people say, I don't want you teaching my kids this. I'm going to raise my kid on that part. There's one parent I heard said, who had a kid at an elite Manhattan school, said, if I'm going to wake my kid up, I'm going to wake him up. You just teach him math. Teach him how to figure things. So here's another one, Sharice's Big Voice. So what happened was that in the Washington Post last Monday, Washington Post writer named Taylor Lorenz, I think she used to write for the New York Times, put up an article about the founder of Libs of TikTok, who had wanted to remain anonymous. She's appeared on news shows, always remained anonymous. So this Taylor Lorenz, she went through and identified her, sent people out to their home, sent people out to the home of relatives. Because why? Because it's a public shaming to get this person to shut up. How dare you put up a video of us saying what we believe? That's hate speech. No, that's just putting up what you believe. You put it on the internet, not me. I just broadcast it out to some more people. I thought you were all about getting views. And 2 weeks ago, Taylor Lorenz was interviewed on MSNBC because somebody had doxed her, outed her, because of some things. And this is what she does. She goes out and doxes people. So somebody did it to her, and she's on MSNBC. Oh, this is so terrible. I just wanted to be left alone and do my job. Now she's doing it to somebody else. Now, the other thing is, how did she find this person? Well, it turns out that she used this thing called the Prototype Fund, project of the Open Knowledge Foundation, Germany, funded by the Federal Ministry of Education and Research. And it turns out that she used this government-funded website, search tracker, whatever, to find out who was behind Libs of TikTok. Now, what should concern you about that? Well, the German government is doing this. Uh-oh, that doesn't sound good. So here's a Spectator, good article if you want to look it up, what at Libs of TikTok exposed. And it's just like they expose what these people believe and say and do. Stuff that they had already, it just reposted what they put on the internet. The always great Christopher Rufo has an article up at City Journal, published it on Thursday, Radical Gender Lessons for Young Children. And he's been exposing this. And what he did is he has obtained the full curriculum documents. Now, what will happen is immediately you're going to have a whole bunch of people out there saying, well, we don't teach that. Remember when the whole critical race theory came up? We don't teach that. One of the persons that came out and said that was the American Federation of Teachers president, Randy Weingarten. And she came out and said, we don't teach critical race theory. I don't know what you're talking about. Even though you could go to the American Federation of Teachers website and find out that we are supporting teachers who are being harassed or disciplined for teaching critical race theory. Well, wait a minute, you just said that nobody's teaching it. Why are you defending them then? There shouldn't be anything to defend. So she was on a show. So I'm going to play a couple little clips of her. I think it's important that you hear what she had to say about what's going on down in Florida with the parental rights thing, which they've improperly named Don't Say Gay and that type of thing. And we have a bill like that coming in Ohio. Article in the Daily Mail. This is the way in which war starts. So here's Randy Weingarten on this podcast.
And instead of everybody joining together in America to get us out of the effects of the pandemic, to, get jobs back and infrastructure built and not only schools reopen, but really kids recovering. Instead of doing that, these right-wing ideologues are just trying to create fear and anxiety and anger, exploiting the fear that parents already have in order to win elections and end public education as we know it. It's unconscionable because they're using politics, creating intense, long-term, harmful, cruel.
Well, yeah, it's just, they're using politics. We would never do that on the left. How dare they? It's just, so what's the rule of thumb? They will always accuse you of what they do. And we're divided, let me tell you. So here's she, a little bit more of what she said in that podcast the other day.
This notion, and look, we've been very lucky in America, and we in some ways live in a bubble for a long time. This is propaganda. Yep. This is misinformation. This is the way in which wars start. This is the way in which hatred starts. So part of what we try to do, this is why they go after educators. What we're trying to do is make sure that, we educate kids, we keep them safe, we keep them welcome, and we help them learn how to think. Not what to think, but how to think, and have the tools so they can discern between fact and fiction. That scares the bejesus out of these extremists who don't want kids to know how to think.
So I can pretty much say without reservation, everything she said is a big fat lie. She's trying to indoctrinate kids. This is the whole purpose of why she exists. So look, when you have these claims of misinformation, disinformation, everything, it's always good to get the voice of reason, right? The person who really understands how important it is to only be talking about right information. So at Stanford University this week, this man stepped forward to explain to us about disinformation because he hates disinformation. He would never engage in that. And here is former President Barack Obama.
Now, the good news is that almost all the big tech platforms now acknowledge some responsibility for content on their platforms, and they're investing in large teams of people to monitor it. Given the sheer volume of content, this strategy can feel like a game of whack-a-mole. Still, talking to people at these companies, I believe they are sincere in trying to limit content that engages in hate speech, encourages violence, or poses a threat to public safety. They genuinely are concerned about it. They want to do something about it. But while content moderation can limit the distribution of clearly dangerous content, it doesn't go far enough. Users who want to spread disinformation have become experts at pushing right up to the line of what at least published company policies allow. And at those margins, social media platforms tend not to want to do anything. Not just because they don't want to be accused of censorship, because they still have a financial incentive to keep as many users engaged as possible. More importantly, these companies are still way too guarded about how exactly their standards operate, or how their engagement ranking systems influence what goes viral and what doesn't. Now, some companies have been taking the next step in managing toxic content, experimenting with new product designs that, to use just one example, add friction to slow the spread of potentially harmful content. And that kind of innovation is a step in the right direction. It should be applauded. But I also think decisions like this shouldn't be left solely to private interests. These decisions affect all of us. And just like every other industry that has a big impact in our society, that means these big platforms need to be subject to some level of public oversight and regulation.
By the way, that First Amendment thing, about Congress shall make no law and government shouldn't do this. Let the private platforms do it. But even for Barack Obama, that's not good enough. So I guess sitting in his sweats in his basement watching basketball and stuff wasn't enough. So now this is second speech he's given on this in a week. So do you think they have a problem, or do you think they're trying to ratchet stuff down? So here they're trotting him out. And so the mask is kind of off, I think. But the First Amendment says you can't do that as government. But did you hear what he said? It doesn't matter to him. He wants government to do this. And that's what they're doing. They're doing this all along. Like, they're going after Marjorie Taylor Greene, whether you like her or not. It's they put her on trial. They had a hearing this week about whether she should stay on the ballot, because she had tweeted things could be favorable to people who were protesting a year ago in D.C. They're trying to knock her and another person in Congress off the ballot in Georgia. Now, listen, that's a federal issue. The state has no business doing it. In fact, that was an editorial today in the New York Times. The New York Times says the state has no business doing this, but that doesn't stop them. And this thing has gone on for several days down there. So what are they doing? So here's a lesson plan that Christopher Rufo pulled up. And this is great. And so I'll just show it to you very quickly. Some of the things that they're teaching kids. This was actually used in schools, in the equality projects, Transgender Day of Visibility. And by the way, when they put up Transgender Day of Visibility, they misspelled visibility. It was on the slide that I used a few weeks ago. So apparently that's not an important part of teaching people how to spell, that one kind of got through. But, the family book, that's a family. Heather has two mommies. This is, I think, used in Chicago. I can respect that all families are different and know that that is cool. Mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, sister, brother, aunts, uncles, two moms equals lesbians, two dads equals gay. And so this kindergarten class, my friends, kindergarten. Here's some of the slides that were used with the kindergarten kids. LGBTQ plus Equity Week. You have here, our book for today is Pride, the story of Harvey Milk and the rainbow flag. Go look up what Harvey Milk was involved in, what he was known for, and now he's an icon. If you have two daddies, we can say they are gay. That means they are two men who love each other. If you have two mommies, they can be called lesbians, and it goes on. So this is kindergarten. If you have a mom and dad, they call them straight. And so do you see what is being done here? And so if you were having these conversations with a child and you're not the parent, you might be called, it would rhyme with zooming. And it fits the definition. And I think I heard Glenn Beck or somebody the other day said, I don't know what else to call them. That's the word that I would use. They have this thing, each color in the flag has this. Our book is Rainbow, the first book of Pride. Now here's day 5. And you see the images that they're showing to these people. And they use this book, I Am Jazz, a transgender, a male dressed as a female. Love story who loves to wear dresses and be a princess. We'll hear another story about a boy who people thought was a girl. There are also children who feel like a girl and a boy, or neither like a boy or a girl. We call these children transgender. This is kindergarten. Your identity is for you to decide. Maybe you have blue hair. Maybe you want to be wearing a necklace. Remember these books, My Princess Boy, Jack, Not Jackie. And these are slides from the thing. You know, this is the Equality Project Day of whatever, visibility. Here's the story of the boy with the rainbow heart. And here's first grade pronouns, LGBTQ plus equity week, they, she, he, they, easy as ABC. And so you can see all these things that what they're doing. Why are some words purple? What is the author trying to show us? What is a pronoun? Which pronouns do you like to be called? Some pronouns are pronouns that girls like to be called. Some pronouns are ones that boys like to be called. Some pronouns are gender neutral. They are for all genders. Using they, them pronouns. They drop their pencil. One person is not they. I'm sorry. And you can go through and use your favorite pronouns in all these sentences. Make sure you get the grammar correct. Here's third grade. Read this article. And this is interesting. Now imagine, what's Catherine Wood's organization? Relationships Under Construction. And she went in and told them about the Holy Spirit and that type of thing. They would run her out of the schools. So it's a great organization if you want to support it. Read this article. This is third grade in the school about two spirit people of indigenous North Americans. Over the next couple of days, students will be hearing the phrase third gender. It is important to know this information. Within a Western and Christian ideological framework, individuals who identify as a third gender are often thought of as part of the LGBTQ community. And this classification actually distorts the concept of a third gender and reflects a culture that historically recognizes only two genders based on sex assigned at birth, male or female, and anyone acting outside of the cultural norms for their sex may be classified as homosexual, genderqueer, or transgender, among other classifications. But you're the ones who made up the term LGBTQIA plus minus whatever. Source for this, Natural History Museum. Western and Christian theological framework. So they're attacking Christianity. Third grade. What can you infer about these images? And all the gender reveal parties that people have when they're pregnant, they're kind of cool. I watch the videos sometimes. They're kind of fun, especially when the, blue and pink show up because they're having twins and nobody knows that. Doctors assign babies their sex assigned at birth. Binary means two parts. Sex assigned at birth is binary. And then it goes on to say, well, that's not really true because, there are people that it's how they feel inside. These are the actual slides used in the classroom with third graders. I spent a lot of time putting this together because it is a myth that gender is binary. People who are non-binary might also be transgender. Gender jam. Let's take the words and move them around in all these different senses and read the definitions and let's have fun. And do what? Randy Weingarten. This is designed to confuse kids and break them away from their parents. Do not tell me anything else. This is child abuse. All genders are valid. What do you notice about this image? Well, they have two-spirit people, indigenous tribes, and they go through and they have all these historical pictures, and it was colonization. It was the evil white people that came and told us that this may be not the right way. And that leads to xenophobia, the fear, dislike, or hatred of what is seen as unknown or strange. And then they have this young Hawaiian girl who's similar to two spirits, Hoani, Hulu warrior. And they have a video and everything about her. Think about the year 2121. Write a letter or draw a poster to the future generation in the year 2121 with what you hope the world will be like. This is third grade. I'm just hoping, in third grade, I'm hoping Cleveland Indians got a better shortstop than what they had, Things to think about may include LGBTQ plus equity, racial equity. Hey, can you imagine some kid who comes to Fellowship Bible Chapel or someplace else that teaches eschatology I'm not sure we'll be here in 100 years, but if the Lord returns, we'll be in this fantastic millennial kingdom. And do you think that's what the teacher's asking for? Not really. Come on. Get your kids trained and, kind of blast some of these teachers out of the water if you insist on having your kids in public school. Here's an example of the letter. Society right now is very unfair. I hope in the future that people can love who they love, be who they are, and feel important. And so you have this thing, here are two-spirit people. And how do we put all this together? So it just goes on. And then they have these other videos that they relate to, like puberty blockers. These are okay. Here's a cute little guy. He's putting his finger in the puberty hormones that are coming in, stopping them up and saying, gotcha, protected you there. That's okay, And by the way, if you're on puberty blockers, you stop, you'll go right back into puberty. There's no science for this. All a big fat lie, but I want you to see, this is a 3-minute clip. It will be painful, but I want you to hear what she has to say in a podcast this week about the things that were important to her and what bothers her. In the midst of economy crashing and the Putin-caused inflation and everything, Press Secretary Jen Psaki, you need to listen to this because she's going to tie the threads together, because I've contended 2015, Supreme Court came out and said what? Same-sex marriage is okay. And what was the question we asked here? And we showed the White House meetings and the White House in red, white, and blue. What's next? Well, you have somebody here who gave it wrapped up in a nice little package.
Let's talk about some of these anti-LGBTQIA and trans bills that are moving through state houses now. You were in the Obama administration when the court legalized same-sex marriage, and I remember that day that the White House was rainbow-colored. And now we're at this place where there's basically a backlash. I'm curious, from where you sit, how do you make sense of what's happening? Is this sort of a predictable backlash to change, or is this an organized political attempt to create a wedge issue ahead of the midterms in the 2024 campaign, sort of like the way gay marriage was weaponized in 2004?
Ding, ding, ding. I can't talk. I have to be careful about
Obama said he was against it, remember?
The Hatch Act police that are waiting outside in the bushes somewhere. But what I will say is that, one, the day that gay marriage was affirmed by the Supreme Court was my favorite day in the White House under President Obama. I was 8 months pregnant, so I was also kind of emotional, and I don't know. But what I will say is the political games and harsh and cruel attempts at laws that we're seeing in some states like Florida, that is not a reflection of the country moving to oppose LGBTQ plus communities. That is not what we see in data. That is not factual. And that is not where things stand. This is a political wedge issue and an attempt to win a culture war. And they're doing that in a way that is harsh and cruel to a community of kids, especially. I'm like going to get I'm going to get emotional about this issue because it's horrible. But But, it's like kids who are bullied, and like all these leaders are taking steps to hurt them and hurt their lives and hurt their families. And you look at some of these laws in these states, and it is going after parents who are in loving relationships, who have kids. It's completely outrageous. Sorry, this is an issue that makes me completely crazy, but it is an issue that is a political wedge issue. It is not a reflection of where the country is. And what people should understand is what we're talking about here in Florida, for example, okay, I'm going to pull my stuff together now, is that, families, if you have a kid in a classroom, and I have a kindergartner, right? I can imagine her saying, my friend has 2 moms, my friend has 2 dads. And the teacher in her classroom, I would hope, would say, that's wonderful. They're loving parents, and you have a mom and a dad. This is penalizing teachers and educators.
Okay, enough of that. Listen, that's misinformation. That's malinformation. I'll stipulate to that. And the reason why it comes up where your kid goes to kindergarten is because you live in a moral cesspool. So in the UK, though, they're inquiring into gender treatment for children. They don't think that it's a good thing. I'm going to just play a little bit of a clip on Tucker Carlson. In New Jersey, they're putting men in women's prisons. Here's a discussion on it. And now there's 2 women prisoners who are pregnant. Well, I think they got pregnant because somebody had sperm. I won't go into the details, but here's a little discussion on Tucker Carlson about this.
Women's prison in New Jersey have just become pregnant. You wonder how that happened. Well, it turns out those women had sexual encounters with another inmate who was a biological man passing as a woman. Now, some people predicted that this would happen, and they were laughed at, mocked, and attacked as bigots. Kara Dansky is at the very top of that list. She said this years ago on our show. She's the president of the U.S. chapter of the Women's Declaration International, author of the book, The Abolition of Sex, How the Transgender Agenda Harms Women and Girls, and we are happy to have Kara Dansky back. Kara, thanks so much for coming on. I'll never forget the first time, and it had to have been at least 4 years ago, when you said, if we keep going down this path, we're going to have biological men in women's prisons. And you were right.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Though the story that's happening in New Jersey is obviously horrible for so many reasons. We need to not have men being housed in women's prisons. But a couple takeaways from this that I just want to point out are, first of all, the state is not getting away with this by telling its residents that they are housing men in women's prisons. What they are doing, of course, is telling the residents that they are housing so-called transgender women or trans women in women's prisons, suggesting that there is some sort of subcategory of women that is called transgender women or trans women, and it's not true. The fact of this story shoots a hole right through the trope that trans women are women. Our society has been taught that we are supposed to say and think that trans women are women, but obviously that is not true, because the individuals that are the focus of the story impregnated women, and every thinking adult, no matter what the President of the United States has to say on the matter, knows that there is no category of women who can impregnate women. So I really want to thank you for highlighting this story. And I also just want to point out.
So, great thing. So now that you got these UN reports out on climate change, you're going to tie this to digital currency and that type of thing. But look at this. This is an article from, I think it's the New York Times this morning. Bitcoin is unlikely to go green. So we're going to put you all in digital currency, but we're going to force you into this, but it's not green. You're going to need big powerhouses and that type of thing. By the way, Facebook Meta says that everything they're building out in New Albany is sustainable and net zero. I don't know. Maybe it is. So let's talk about this. This is always one where I get in trouble, if I say, I think Putin is lying and propaganda. And immediately people say, oh, well, you're anti-Ukraine. No. I think Ukraine's got some issues. Oh, so you think Ukraine might be not telling the truth all the time? You're pro-Putin. Let's be nuanced. We can not like anybody. We cannot like what the United States and EU and NATO does in all of this. They're tearing down the world economy. This is Foreign Affairs, which is the Council on Foreign Relations publication, their new thing that's out called The World After the War. And it says the return of conquest. And so, look, I think Russia is going to win this thing in the end. You know, there's in Times of London, I think, does a great job with their graphics and everything about the sinking of this ship. You know, now there are reports that the U.S. was giving satellite intel and positions to these people. Putin has kind of focused his thing on eastern Ukraine and the Donbass and Luhansk regions. There's still this steel plant in Mariupol where there are 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people hiding out, some soldiers, some not. Putin came out and said, well, we've conquered Mariupol, we're moving on to some other things. In Lviv, which is in western Ukraine, over closer to Poland, 7 people died in missile strikes on that city. Immediately this happens, and people come out and say, Ukraine did that to themselves. They're just trying to get sympathy. Okay, you can believe whatever you want. Listen, folks, Russia's been the biggest propaganda machine on planet Earth for a couple of generations. They're very, very good at it. And look, Ukrainians, they do some of it, they do stuff too. But don't just buy everything hook, line, and sinker. I mean, just please, and don't write to me and say, you need to listen to so-and-so. Listen, I look up these guys that people send me, and they're employed by RT and Russia Insider. What does that tell me? Who are they working for? They're paid by them. So here's Epic Times. Russia lifted off, it's a Satan missile, they call it, in a display of force the other day. This is a pretty powerful nuclear missile. Now look, I don't know anybody else who's testing nuclear missiles right now except Iran and North Korea. That's just a fact. And that I know of, okay? It's possible that I don't know everything. But he's sending a message, isn't he? And I can tell you that if something happens in Ukraine, immediately I see all these videos and stuff going up with people. America did that. America false flag. And that they're going to cause nuclear war. And there have been a number of these things that have happened in Ukraine, and there's been no nuclear war caused yet. Okay, so maybe it's the constellation. But every time something happens in Ukraine, and we only talk about Ukraine because that's really the only country that's being attacked right now for the most part, at least in this particular theater, is Ukraine's being attacked. And so every time something happens, that's Ukraine doing it to themselves, is what a lot of people say. And believe that if you want, okay? We all have rational minds. So analyze it, come to your own conclusion. I just hate the division in the body of Christ over people that it's awful. It's just awful. It's like that, by the way. Thursday night, I did a video with Doug Hamp on Prophecy Roundtable on the video about the water and venom. I'll just refer you to that. My conclusion is I have problems with that video. I have theological problems with the video suggesting that you can take the mark of the beast involuntarily. That's not theologically correct. And also in that video, at the end, how did the guy get confirmation that he should go forward with this? God spoke to him in a fortune cookie. Don't think that's correct, my friends. If I got up here some Sunday and said, hey, I was working on my sermon and I thought I had it nailed. I studied the Greek, the Hebrew, the verb tenses, and then we went to that Chinese restaurant and I got a fortune cookie, and I think I was wrong. And I'm sorry, I just don't find any theological basis for this. And I had a very dear person say to me, well, you shouldn't put God in a box. Okay, I agree. God's way bigger than anything I can imagine. Look at the complexity of the DNA and how all these things work, and similarities from animals to animals. I said, but if I don't get to put God in a box, you don't get to put him in a fortune cookie. Seriously. And I still love this person. She's a wonderful person, okay? We really disagree on this. So they're looking at deploying another thing. They're talking about maybe going into Moldova and people in Moldova in the separatist regions, a thing called Transnistria. They're concerned about it. So Russia seems to be focusing on the east. I mean, you see all these leaders. I think Lloyd Austin and Secretary Blinken are going to Kiev or Kyiv or whatever they call it now. There's always Kiev when I was growing up. People are talking about war crimes, and you see all these pictures of graves, mass graves in Mariupol. A lot of people have died. I mean, this is Mariupol. Here's a report. This is out of the Australian newspapers this morning. Someone sent to me. Hundreds of Ethiopian men are lining up to join Russia's fight in Ukraine because they like Russia. Commentary in the Times of London. Putin could nuke Ukraine and get away with it. Who's going to fight him? He's got the most powerful nuclear arsenal on the planet. He's not to be trivialized with. Here's what the Germans said. This is always kind of interesting because, some theory is that Europe's going to rise and be the final beast empire. And that may work out that way. But this is where my logistics ideas come in. Germany says, we couldn't defend ourselves if we sent any weapons to Ukraine. They have like 50 tanks. And they're going to say, well, America, you'll pay for it. So Boris Johnson says, I'll send in our tanks. And then the New York Times, I think it was yesterday, this AI company say, hey, look at our ship. And Russia, this is from one of the Russian newspapers, Russia's turning east. Interesting New York Times editorial this morning. This is the New York Times, okay? So we know that a lot of lies in the New York Times. There's some truth in there if you dig around. Interesting editorial this morning, acknowledging the limits of sanctions. You see how Putin's breaking free of the sanctions? And now here, this stuff comes in, and it says this. This is Janet Yellen. This is from the Times of London this morning, saying oil ban could help Kremlin, warns U.S. Well, wait a minute. You're the one who's doing the oil ban. Now you're telling us it's actually going to help Russia. Sometimes you wonder who they're working for, right? I said this about Obama all the time. I thought he could have been a plant. What did he ever do that did not eventually help Russia? And it seems like maybe he's back in charge again. And, he's making speeches now. And he got the teleprompter and everything. Russian oil ban poses threat of recession in the European Union. Big election today in France. Here's a editorial from the Financial Times. Big war going on between globalists, patriots versus globalists. Interesting stuff. So let's look at, just here's a few things in the Middle East. Raisi starkly warns Israel. They had Army Day the other day in Tehran where they paraded all of their missiles and that type of thing. Iranian President Raisi on Monday issued a strong warning against any Israeli move to harm Iran, making sure that Iran is aware of Israel's possible plans to take the battle into Iran. The timing and the venue from which the warning was issued could not be more meaningful. This is the Tehran Times saying this. They're pro-Iranian regime, by the way. President Raisi made the remarks during a military parade held on the occasion of the Iranian Army Day. Flanked by Army generals in an elevated stand, Raisi told parading troops that Iran will respond to any Israeli aggression against Iran in Israel's depth. In other words, you hit us, we're going in to hit you. He said if Tel Aviv commits the slightest mistake, Iran will respond at the heart of Israel. And then the foreign minister, perpetrators of the Soleimani assassination will be brought to justice. They have a list right now. So this is what's insane about this. So you have the United States talking about removing the Iranian Revolutionary Guard from the list of terror outfits in the world, giving them $100 billion or more dollars. And this guy running around saying, we're going after everybody. So people in the former administration, I think, wasn't Trump in Delaware last night? Delaware, Ohio. They have to have bodyguards. Mike Pompeo. Iran said they have 127 people on our list we're coming after. So we're going to take them off the list. And again, I ask the question is, who are these guys in that cesspool down there that we also call the swamp? Who are they really working for? Are they working for us? It doesn't appear to me to be the case. So here's Iran News talking about this. Here's a little a picture of some of the missiles that are parading by. So they put it's nice. They bring out all their drones and everything and let everybody know exactly what they're doing. At the same time, we have these conflicts. They vandalized Joseph Tomb. I talked a little bit about that. First hour, here's Haaretz saying a rocket was fired from Jordan, and Israel and Jordan and Israel are in a war of words over the Temple Mount. And so the thing that happened, so here you see the Palestinians parading with their flag on the Temple Mount, and then the question was, well, can Israel do the same thing? At the same time, the people that are in the Abraham Accords with Israel, the Arab countries are coming out in support of the Palestinians on this. And I showed you the picture last week of the rocks that they have there, and they're in the mosque playing soccer, getting rocks. This is Al-Aqsa Mosque, and they got their shoes on, for crying out loud. So, and then they throw the rocks down on the people at the Western Wall, at the Kotel, and Israel goes in to stop it or tries to stop it. Oh, they're storming Al-Aqsa. They're taking over Al-Aqsa. Just stop lying. And the foreign minister of Jordan is out there. He's just saying some horrible things. Putin's trying to get control of a Russian church in Jerusalem. That's kind of an interesting mix in all of this. This is out of sequence. Professor wins $400,000 payout in rebellion over trans pronouns. This happened down in Portsmouth at Shawnee State. Professor got fired because he wouldn't recognize somebody's chosen pronouns. Shawnee State's paying him $400,000. Good. I just hope it's probably with our tax dollars, but. So here it is. His Eminence, the Chief Justice Sheikh Abdul Hafiz al-Rabta, condemned the serious and continuing violations and crimes committed by the occupation forces against the Palestinian people and worshipers in the blessed Al-Aqsa Mosque. In a press statement, the Chief Justice affirmed that attempts to change the current situation in the blessed Al-Aqsa Mosque are a condemned violation, calling for a halt to all illegal and provocative measures that push towards further aggravation. What the occupation is doing in Al-Aqsa Mosque and Al-Quds al-Sharif is a blatant and dangerous attack on one of the most important sanctities of Muslims, and this series of repeated attacks reveals its plan towards Al-Aqsa Mosque, et cetera, et cetera. Anytime, a Jewish person went up there, a Jewish foreign minister went to the Temple Mount. I mean, it's just in everything, and people are dying. The situation is pretty stark and out of control. But look, so these are the pictures of, so I guess they shut down the Temple Mount and nobody could go up there to worship, right? These are pictures. This is by the way, this is from Al-Quds newspaper, which is the Palestinian mouthpiece newspaper published in East Jerusalem. So these were taken the other day. And you see the t-shirt that you can buy there? That's a peaceful t-shirt, right? Here they are on the Temple Mount. If I got up there on that arch, the world would come to an end. So, they barely can get up there. They put so many restrictions on people. They can only get a few people up there to worship. Israel wanted to have a parade of flags. They had one when we were in Jerusalem 5 years ago. Wonderful time. It was glorious. It really was. And so they're stopping them from going. They're going to march around the old city. Here are terror tunnels up in Gaza Strip. Here is, I guess this is somebody storming the, no, I guess nobody is storming. Well, they were thinking about it. Here's this parade of flags. So they went downtown Jerusalem. Arab states say that Israel has no right to admit non-Muslim style Aqsa. Tony Blinken, of course, he weighed in. He called for an end to the cycle of violence. And it's like, just be quiet. So here, I have a clip. I'm going to play maybe 2 clips from Caroline Glick's show that just got posted this morning, just because I like Caroline Glick and I like what she has to say about this. This is from Iranian news service. Zionist media outlets mentioned that Hezbollah has deployed elite forces on border with the occupied Palestinian territories after they have gained years of combat experience in Syria. This comes from up in Lebanon. The Israeli media indicated that Hezbollah has improved its defensive capabilities and augmented its firepower set to be used against, quote, Israel. Transgender Israel, scare quotes, considering that the deployment of Hezbollah al-Rudawan elite forces on the borders is the major change on that front. And they're putting forces up there. So here's Caroline. She had a conversation with David Friedman, the former ambassador to Israel from the United States, and the man behind the Abraham Accords. And I'm not a big fan of those, mainly because of the treachery that you see coming out about people who are saying, Israel, you cannot do this and that. You can't do things that are common sense. Before I do that, there is one other article here that you should. This comes from, this is from Jerusalem Post. When will Saudi-Israeli ties go public? That's kind of an interesting thing in light of these Abraham Accords. We think that that's legitimate question. Maybe tie in with Bible prophecy pretty closely. We'll talk more about this, and I'll talk more about this. I think I'm doing an interview with somebody this week, and Pablo at Serpents and Doves. But we'll get something up, or we'll cover it next Sunday. It was kind of a light week in terms of Israel because it was the convergence of all these holidays: Ramadan, Christians, Easter, and the Ramadan for the Muslims, and Passover for Jews. So they all kind of hit on the same day. This is kind of a strange convergence. So here's Caroline and her podcast just released this morning, making some comments on things that are happening.
Last night there were reports, that there was supposed to be a parade of activists around the walls of the old city holding Israeli flags as a patriotic response to the violence that's emanating from the mosques and the Temple Mount. That they're under constant incitement, not only from people on the Temple Mount, in the Waqf, and the Islamic authorities in Jerusalem, but also a steady stream from the Palestinian Authority, and even a steady stream from the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, whose prime minister just made an incredibly anti-Semitic speech a couple of days ago, praising the Muslim rioters on the Temple Mount. And then, rather than stand up to this incitement, the government, again, this was the next day, they canceled the march. They didn't allow the activists to march in Israel's capital with the flags of Israel, lest that be a provocation. And the left-wing news media in Israel were attacking this one far-right member of Knesset for daring to insist that Jews be allowed to be at the Damascus Gate outside of the walls of the old city, and so on and so forth. And then Hamas's media outlets were praising the fact that they had forced Israel to surrender without even shooting a gun.
And this is something else related to Jordan. Here is of course, the king of Jordan, he had these big meetings, and he never mentions Jewish rights to the Temple Mount. He just can't do it. It's just not possible for him to do that. He probably would be deposed if he did. But this is from Al Gad newspaper, I think Thursday or Friday, talking about, they actually had a meeting in the Jordanian parliament. Israel has a peace agreement with Jordan, right? How's that going? Well, here's what it said. Non-Muslim visits to Al-Aqsa are the exclusive right of the Islamic endowments. 87 of 123 members of the Jordanian parliament demand the expulsion of the Israeli ambassador and the severing of relations with the occupying entity. Prime Minister Bashar al-Kassawana affirmed that Jordan does not and will not stand on two sides with regard to occupied Jerusalem and the Christian and Islamic holy sites, but rather stands at the heart of one man under the Hashemite leadership and under the Hashemite guardianship exercised by His Majesty King Abdullah II. This came during the parliament session yesterday, during which the current events and occupied Jerusalem and the Blessed Al-Aqsa Mosque overshadowed its events, as the deputies listened to a speech from the Prime Minister, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and some others. The representatives adopted a memorandum signed by 87 members of parliament calling for the expulsion of the Zionist ambassador from Amman and the summoning of the Jordanian ambassador from Tel Aviv in protest against the attacks and desecration of the sanctity of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. You know the sanctity of the Al-Aqsa Mosque? This Al-Aqsa Mosque that no Jewish person has entered, to my knowledge. Maybe they did when they were trying to get the rebellion queued down. So here's another little quick clip from Caroline. I think I have maybe two more short ones, and then we'll be out of here.
I think that's interesting is that you're right. I mean, there were fundamental pathologies in the U.S.-Israel relationship going back to 1948 in terms of, like you said, that Israel is a burden, not a resource, not an asset to the United States. And there's a sense that Israel is a client state, and the only real reason that the United States even recognized Israel, let alone is helping Israel, is because U.S. public opinion supports Israel. But that's a problem that has to be dealt with rather than a position that should be really analyzed and thought about for what it means in terms of how America views itself and how the world views America. But something, and we saw that throughout. We saw that, you know, from Eisenhower through George W. Bush. But was there something fundamentally different or qualitatively different about the way the Obama administration viewed Israel in the way that its predecessors do, or do you think that it was just more of the same?
I think Obama was worse, and I think he took the next step that we had always hoped that no president would take, which was to view the relation to view the Sunni moderates as threats rather than assets as well. In other words, it was he thought that the way to fix the Middle East was to go after the worst actor, take the absolute worst actor and embrace that actor, because if you could embrace Iran and bring them around, well, then everybody else would that was the most difficult problem. Let's tackle that. And what I think he didn't grasp, and hopefully somebody will grasp it now, I think we're about to make the same mistake, is that you don't just kind of weakly go to your worst actor and say, we want to be friends. What you do is you form alliances with your friends, and you collectively go to a country like Iran and say, these are the red lines that we won't tolerate, and if these red lines are broken, the consequences will be dire for their own future, and not let the world. I mean, why does Israel have to sit around all day long and listen to countries that have no skin in the game and have no knowledge, no deep knowledge of the issues, have debates about what Israel should do with the Palestinians? It's not their issue. It's Israel's issue, and I believe the Israelis are well-meaning people. They're intelligent people. They want to get to the right outcome. They don't want to subjugate people. They want to get to the outcome, but they have to do it in a way where they don't commit suicide. But this discussion has been kind of observed in the breach by most Israelis. They don't want to touch it because it's almost like the abortion issue in America. Congress will never decide because it's too difficult an issue. America can get away with this, leaving it to the Supreme Court if that's what they want to do, but Israel can't get away with ceding such an important issue to other countries.
I agree. So, I mean, basically, just to sum up what you were saying, is that you're saying, Israel, you're the center of the Jewish world. What happens here is going to decide not only whether Israel survives, but whether the Jewish people survive everywhere. Grow up. Grow up. You're 75 years old. Be a grown-up here And you know, it's so funny because when you think about all of the gifts that the Trump administration gave Israel, and I think, you know, you've made the point, and you proved in your actions that it not only helped Israel, they weren't only gifts to Israel, but they all advanced in a very, very significant way. The U.S.'s strategic standing, its posture, its national security in the Middle East and really around the world. So it was to both. It was to the mutual benefit of both countries. But you guys went from the consensus. You went from Jerusalem, moving the embassy. You moved on. I don't remember what you did next, but you recognized Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, which, at least as far as Israel is concerned, is a consensus issue. I mean, and it hasn't really been discussed as something that Israel is supposed to, you know, cough up for peace with the Assads since at least the Syrian civil war began, 13 years ago. So that was also a consensus issue that you were able to just snap your fingers and have it done, and it was fine and important. And then you moved on to the Palestinians, and here really you set it up. You know, you said, okay, look, the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria are not in their face, a priori or whatever, per se illegal. Just like anywhere else, there may be places that aren't proper, but they're not illegal. And that was important. And then you move. So you're saying to Israel, look, here are training wheels. Here, we're doing this. We're doing this. Now we're getting to the hardest issue for you. What do you want? Who do you want to be when you grow up?
And it's interesting. She talks about, we're told in the Torah, teach your children all these things. And this is Holy Week in Israel for that. So look, this is all prophesied that this heart of Israel, the heart of this dispute will be the Temple Mount and the city of Jerusalem and the nation of Israel. And we see it. It's a big deal everywhere you go. It's on everybody's lips over there. So it is an unusual time with all the other things that are going on, supply chains and that type of thing all over the world. The world is in a bit of turmoil, and the world is, as I said at the beginning, the world is Meshugge. I mean, it's crazy. So get in the Word, be in prayer, be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. And I just want to say one thing. Because I have some questions about that video on the water, does not mean I'm in favor of anything, okay? I just want the videos that are put out to be good, factual, solid, well-reasoned. That's what I want. So there's a way to go about this, and I just don't think that video was the way. But you can go look at my Thursday night roundtable where I talk about that. So let's pray. Lord, we thank you for your word. We thank you for the gift that you gave us of Bible prophecy so that we could make some sense of what's going on in a crazy world and know that the only real thing is that you are in control, that you gave us the gift of your Son and the gospel of Jesus Christ, and that we need to share this with the world and disciple believers. Pray that you'll give us opportunities to do that. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.